Back when I reviewed Madden 16, I said the gameplay saw some much needed upgrades, but the modes were terribly designed and sorely lacking in immersion. When I reviewed Madden 17, it was more of the same, though franchise got some upgrades that year and gameplay was mostly tuning. Madden 17 was a slight improvement over Madden 16. Madden 18, which I bought on launch, did not click with me at all. So I sold it after 2 days and didn't even feel like bothering with a review. And here we are with Madden NFL 19, and I've got a lot to say about this one. If you check out the time of this video, you can see that it's going to be a long review, so I went ahead and put timestamps down in the description below so you can jump to any part of the review that you want. So let me start this review by saying that I was a part of the beta EA ran this past June and into July. I can't really go into the details about the beta itself, but I will say that this game has improved greatly since the first version of the beta I played. I wouldn't call Madden 19 a finely tuned game, but it's evident to me that the feedback provided did this game very well. I also need to state that I played this game on PC. That's right, Madden has finally returned to PC after an 11-year hiatus. This has been a double-edged sword in my experience. The good is that this is the best I've ever seen Madden look and run. My 3-year-old PC is able to run the game on high-quality settings smoothly, for the most part. There is an audio-visual stutter that continues to plague my experience, even though the game runs at 60 FPS at all times. I've tried to narrow this problem down, and the only thing I can think of is that I'm running the game on Windows 7 Pro Edition, and it might need to be on Windows 10, but I'm not really willing to upgrade to Windows 10, so hopefully they find a fix in there. And this is all after a few updates to the game. The first time I tried running Madden 19, I could not get it to run smoothly at all. So if you hear some stuttering in this review, it's not your screen or device, it's the game. But besides that, oh, is this game beautiful. The detail from pads can be seen through uniforms, the player models for the most part look fantastic, helmets shine and reflect, stadiums nearly take my breath away, and the 3D grass looks sharp. Through my first 30 plus hours of gameplay, I was constantly remarking on how gorgeous the game looked. There are some stadiums, however, that have really low lighting, especially at certain camera angles, that can make the game look way too dark. Again, this all depends on the stadium, weather, time of day, and camera angles, so it doesn't happen every game, but it happens enough to hinder the user's experience. The gameplay of Madden 19 has seen a significant leap forward in my experience, and it's largely due to RPM, real player motion. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's all smiles and rainbows with RPM because it's not. RPM is proving to be very much like the Infinity Engine, EA's name for their physics engine that they debuted back with Madden 13. At times, RPM will produce some beautiful scenarios that we've never seen possible in prior Maddens. This shines the most with things like hard cuts for running backs. But it's not just the ball carrier that's affected by RPM. Defensive players must also adhere to RPM, which means you'll see more defensive backs lose a receiver on a good route, tacklers overshoot their pursuit angles and get brought to their knees by a simple one-cut, and good route runners get more open on curls and slants. RPM certainly seems to accentuate the rating system in some areas. But RPM is fairly new tech, and it's new to Madden this year, which means you're going to see some really silly things happen, just as much as the good stuff. The CPU at times really has a hard time with deciding whether they should make a small cut or a big cut. Or maybe they know exactly what cut they want to make, and the RPM system is just so sensitive that it makes the CPU perform moves it didn't intend to. Sometimes the CPU will make way too many cuts, making you say, oh, now he's got an opening, or maybe not. You'll also see some oddities happen with player acceleration too. At times it seems like players are just jogging when they should be running as hard as they can to make a play. Kick returners feel like they're running in a gear below what they should be. You'll even notice that defenders seem to have an easier time accelerating than the offensive players do. With tuning, I think RPM will definitely be just the thing Madden needs to help differentiate players, something they struggled to do for a really long time now. But it's not there yet, and if you're on the fence about whether or not to get this game based off of RPM, you'll need to ask yourself if you have the patience to bear witness to the infancy of unstable new tech. Things could be drastically improved down the line with patches, but it's not a guarantee. One gameplay improvement that will be sure to please longtime Madden players is how the ball carrier reacts when trapped behind a blocker. In previous years, a runner would likely get stuck go limp, and eventually fall to the ground or be tackled. It was a frustrating experience, but Madden 19 has sought to eliminate those frustrations by allowing the ball carrier to put an arm on his blocker's back. This gives the runner space to make the next move and is key for having patience when running behind your line. I've heard for a few years now the developer saying, "Don't hit that turbo button" when starting your run, but it never seemed to be very fruitful. This year the blocking works so well, for the most part, that holding off on the turbo button allows holes to form and leads to more consistent, smaller gains, while breaking a big run has become far more difficult. What's even more nice than being able to put an arm out on your blocker is that even if the ball carrier doesn't put an arm out and gets stuck in a big pile of players, he still doesn't go limp. I had a nice spin out of a scrum that got me a good amount of yardage, and it felt rewarding. The CPU run game seems weak at best. On All-Pro default sliders, runners rarely got more than 30 yards against my Ravens defense, with a few exceptions getting 70 to 90 yards due to big runs. Guys like Le'Veon Bell were easy to completely shut down. Perhaps this had something to do with me usering the defensive tackle, but CPU run blocking is definitely something you'll want to turn up in the sliders. Ultimately, running the ball feels extremely rewarding, and seeing the blocking play out like it should warms this old football fan's heart. Again, it won't be perfect every single play, but it's a significant improvement from where we were. Let's switch over to quarterback play. I was happy to see that CPU QBs were underthrowing and overthrowing a fair amount of passes. Combine that with the deflected and dropped passes, and no QB in my first season in franchise had higher than a 77% completion rate during a single game. And that 77% was Drew Brees. Your QB is more susceptible to throwing errant passes too, though it did seem like player-controlled QB accuracy was maybe a bit more accurate than the CPUs. Still, playing as Joe Flacco, I missed quite a few more throws than I would have in any previous Madden. Another thing I really like about the passing game was the pass blocking. Sticking around in the pocket has never felt better. Pockets form beautifully, allowing you to step up with confidence and make your reads. That's not to say you'll have all day to throw. Most of the time you'll be blasted after 3 seconds, but it's nice to not have to drop back 10 yards just to feel protected. One-on-one wide receiver defensive back interactions on the outside aren't as money as they were before, but you can still get a good mismatch from time to time. C routes and out routes are much more difficult to complete. I used C routes a lot in the past few years when I needed a big play, but I found myself shying away from them after seeing how contested they are this year. Pass trajectories could still use a lot of work, but they're serviceable. There were times when my receivers would seemingly give up on a very catchable pass while I was controlling them, but Madden 19 developer Clint Oldenburg has explained that you'll now have to hold on to the catch button instead of just tapping it to complete the catch. I'm going to be straight with you guys. I'm not an X's and O's kind of guy. I've never claimed to be that. There are other, much more capable people in the community who can go over how zones and man are playing and stuff like that. I'll have some of those linked in the description below, so you can go check those out if you're curious about how those have or haven't improved. Wrapping up the gameplay portion of the review, I'd have to say that I really like the way Madden 19 is playing. It's consistently fun, often rewarding, and better than it's ever been before. To some, that might not be saying a whole lot, and honestly, if you really haven't cared for Madden for the past few years, I doubt you'll have a strong change of heart this year. It's still Madden football. This isn't a brand new game, but if you have played Madden 17 or 18 and thought the gameplay was on the edge of promising, you might want to give 19 a shot. You may be pleasantly surprised. As most of you know, franchise is my wheelhouse. There is no area of the game I care more about than franchise mode. And Madden's franchise mode has been a loaf of stale and moldy bread for several years now, in my humblest of opinions. Franchises lacked immersion in even the most basic sense. It's felt cold and lifeless, a glorified spreadsheet with several legacy issues. Madden creative director Rex Dixon tweeted that they owed us franchise guys a big year this year. That was, of course, before Rex Dixon left and franchise fans were told that no matter what we got, it was never enough by a guy whose stint was short-lived. But hey, let's keep our focus here. Did franchise mode get the big year that we were promised? In my opinion, no, it did not. Now that's not to say that franchise isn't better this year, because in my view it is. There were improvements made, and those improvements do help the mode feel a bit more fresh. and I'll go over those improvements here in just a bit. But to me, the problem franchise mode has, and has had for some time now, is the disconnected feeling you get playing the mode. I've never really felt like I was a part of a league. I've always felt like I've been put in a single lane and encouraged to stay in my lane, building my team, playing my games, and doing it all over again, instead of being involved in an ever-evolving league with big news coverage, dynamic player personalities, and all the intricacies involved in all of that. So when I sit down with a new year of Madden and play through their franchise mode, I ask myself if I feel like any of that was addressed, and I don't really feel like it was with Madden 19, outside of a few in-game presentation elements. Franchise mode has a problem, and that problem was not solved with Madden 19 in my view. So what is improved? Let's start with probably the biggest change, player archetypes. For years, Madden has included scheme fits. Players would be categorized as a certain player archetype, and their overall would adjust according to which scheme you had selected. Your players would earn XP, and you could then spend their XP on whichever attribute you saw fit. In Madden 19, this has all been fitted together. If you have a player that fits your scheme, they will earn more XP as a result. Each scheme has different scheme fits for different positions, and you cannot adjust those positions to your liking, although you can change your overall scheme at any time. This doesn't mean that players that don't fit your scheme will play worse in your system. The only attribute that changes is the overall, which is viewed differently by each team, and is just a formula of different attributes that matter to that position anyway. The only thing that the new player archetype feature affects is progression rate. You can still choose any playbook you want. This also greatly changes how you build a team in a very positive way. Do you draft the higher ranked QB who's not a scheme fit? Or do you take a chance on trading back and drafting a lower ranked QB who does fit your scheme with the hopes that he'll eventually become a better player? Do you sign the veteran in free agency who doesn't fit your scheme because you know you only have him for 1 year and don't care about his progression? Now, as you can probably see, this raises a few questions. Why not build the system to be linked to a playbook? Why can't I just change specific positions to fit whatever I want for my team? This is where you have to pull yourself back a bit and look at this as a video game. Each feature they build needs to have a function, and the function needs to be balanced so that it's not overpowered. The feature also needs to be flexible. By leaving this to something that only affects XP progression, the designers can hone in on a rule set. While I definitely think there's room here to improve the system they've come up with, I feel like what they've come up with here works. More importantly, it blows the old XP spending system out of the water. When a player gets enough XP, they'll earn a skill point. After the game in which they earn that skill point is over, you'll be taken to a screen where the player will be waiting for his upgrade. You're presented with each of the archetypes available to upgrade. You'll choose one and it'll randomly increase a set of attributes related to that archetype enough so that the archetype increases 1 overall. Not only that, but your choice of archetype could potentially upgrade other archetypes, depending on which attributes they share. It's a quick and easy system that has a nice aesthetic. Undoubtedly, some will hate it because of having less control over upgrading your players, but I personally think it gives you enough control while still adding some fairness to what gets upgraded. Another new feature that was advertised for Madden 19 is the draft class editor. You can now create your own custom draft classes and import them into your franchise. To be honest, this is something that I really don't have much use for personally, as I've gotten used to rolling with the draft classes that are randomly created by the system, but for those who want to recreate historical draft classes, add in custom players, or just spice things up, it's now an option. I don't think we'll really feel the effects of this feature until we start seeing classes being released from groups of people who aim to create those NCAA classes. For some, this feature will add a few years of longevity to their franchise saves. For players like myself, it'll probably be seen as time that could have been better spent elsewhere. One of the first things you'll notice when you load up a franchise save is the real-time backgrounds that show your player or coach, depending on which career path you decided to take, moving around and doing various tasks, like typing on their computer or looking at their phone. You can also now capture screenshots from the replay system while you're playing a game, and those shots will pop up on the TV screens in the background and in the newsfeed menu. This is a small feature that does add a bit of connection to what's going on with your team. Unfortunately though, you don't see screenshots from any other team, so it's just your games that you're going to see. Presentation for the draft has gotten a bit of attention. The background of the draft menu is now a draft stage, showing the previous pick with their overall and who is currently on the clock. When you make your selection, your pick will get a close-up shot and it'll make a pose to indicate its development trait, along with a list of their attributes. I really dig the draft stage, and I'm glad that they're starting to understand just how important the NFL draft is. The draft used to be something that was held in a conference room in a hotel in New York, but for a while now, the draft has been a huge event, filled with drama, excitement, and suspense. Madden 19 doesn't quite hit the ball out of the park in this sense, but it's a definite improvement. I mean, it's still the same draft system we've had for many years now, but aesthetics can go a long way in spicing something up. Unfortunately, the rest of franchise is pretty much the same deal, outside of some presentation elements that I'll touch on in just a moment. The mode still has that feel of being disconnected from the rest of your league. Not only do you not get news stories on the front page outside of a slow-moving and understated ticker at the bottom, the button to jump to the news page, which is still buried in the back page somewhere, has been replaced with a gallery button to view screenshots. It's almost as if the designers don't want you to know what's going on in your league, like they're going out of their way to keep you in your lane. For me, that's not what franchise mode is all about. There are also plenty of legacy issues that people will take offense to, like simulation stats being too high for lower rated players and too low for higher rated players. CPU roster management AI is still pretty bad. I saw the Bills sign Tyrod Taylor in free agency, even though Josh Allen won Rookie of the Year the previous season. You'll see teams make questionable draft choices and trades, and some players aren't showing up on the NFL stats page for some reason. When you add it all up, yes, franchise is better this year than it was last year, and I happen to not only like most of the additions to the mode, but I also think those features are indicative of taking a step in the right direction for the future of the mode. What you have here is just a small step on a long journey to eventually get this mode to where it needs to be. As a developer, this might have been a significant year for them in terms of work and resources. As a consumer, I don't feel like this was a significant year. Again, I do think it's a positive step, but considering how long franchise fans have been waiting to see this mode shine, it will undoubtedly disappoint more than a few. Now on to presentation. The most significant presentation element this year in my mind is the new halftime show. No longer hosted by Larry Ridley, Madden 19's halftime show forgoes the highlights of your game and instead gives you up to 3 updates from the games going on around your league. This new halftime show is hosted by former ESPN, now WWE personality Jonathan Coachman. I'm unsure if this replacement will last beyond this year, as Coachman now works for a company that has a licensing deal with 2K, but I do like the switch here. I was never personally a fan of Larry Ridley, but beyond that, a new voice can go a long way in freshening up the presentation. I also like the switch from highlights of your game to updates from around the league. That leans more towards my ideal franchise mode of immersing you in your league. However, I can't help but feel this sort of thing would have been far more useful as a weekly wrap-up show, and instead having game updates a la NCAA Football 14. Commentators Brandon Gaudin and Charles Davis return for their 3rd year of commentary, and they'll occasionally talk about games that are going on around your league, but it seems pretty rare. Also, Gaudin and Davis are starting to get really stale. That's not the fault of Gaudin and or Davis. I think those guys do a great job and I really enjoy them as the commentators of Madden. Unfortunately, we hear a lot of the same lines we've heard for the past 3 years, and we hear them frequently. I was playing as the Ravens in my franchise, where it rained almost every home game, and I had to hear the line about the portable laminator every single time.
It is. By the way, how impressive is it that you travel with a laminator? I didn't even know there was a portable laminator.
The things that you learn.
Golly, wise beyond his years.
Commentary also has a few issues, calling players by wrong names and calling out wrong situations at times, like claiming some player other than the quarterback has passed the ball. The presentation for pregame and transition wipes has also seen an upgrade. You now get stylish 3D logos before each game, new stadium exterior shots, stat banners, and more. The stadium exteriors especially look great, but a lot of the presentation is still functionally the same. The ticker at the bottom of the screen now gives you player stats from each game as it goes, which is a nice piece of immersion. Really, the biggest qualm I have with presentation is that I still don't think there's a big enough distinction between the different kinds of games. The score bug stays the same no matter what day or what game it is. These are small things in the grand scheme of the upgrades this game really needs, but it's a nice piece of immersion building that is long overdue. Speaking of long, Longshot has returned for a second season, despite the fair amount of hardcore Madden fans dismissing the mode in Madden 18. Personally, Longshot was one of the few things I actually enjoyed in Madden 18. The debate about the amount of resources Longshot uses up every year will undoubtedly rage on, but it's here, so let's talk about it. Longshot Season 2 picks up shortly after the events of the first. Devin Wade has been cut from the team he was drafted to or signed by at the end of last year's campaign and is looking to catch on with the Dallas Cowboys, while Colt Cruz is struggling to come up with another hit song after his Longshot single swept the charts in Finland. The unfortunate news here is that your actions in the first Longshot mean nothing to Longshot Season 2. It seems there were plans to make this second iteration branch off from the first, but what we get here is a more straightforward narrative. You have almost no choice or influence on the outcome of the story here, and failing a gameplay sequence just prompts you to try again if you don't complete the objective. Fair warning, the writers threw nearly every sports movie and TV show cliche into the mixing pot here and turned the heat up. This will no doubt get some eyes rolling, but I was actually pleased with the story. I really liked it more than the first one. I see a lot of films, and I see a lot of different types of films. Most sports movies, even the most well-received ones, are full of cliches themselves. I don't really go into a sports story looking for the most profound messages. I want to see sports, and I want to see how people deal with those sports, both on and off the playing surface. And I can guarantee that if you traveled to a dozen different high schools and documented the lives of student athletes, you'd see a lot of the same things transpiring. All that to say this: working with what they had to work with the NFL and EA guidelines in place, I think Longshot's story succeeds. Sort of. The obvious weak spot of Longshot Season 2's story is Devin Wade. His story starts out promising, battling for a QB spot in training camp. This is really where Longshot shines for me as a franchise-minded player. Seeing players in pads and shorts, battling for spots, being yelled at by position coaches, talking with GMs, hearing different announcers, seeing different presentation elements, this is all stuff that's sorely missing from franchise mode. In some ways, Longshot does franchise mode better than franchise mode. But let's get back to Wade's story. Or can we? I mean, Devin's story drops off a cliff from there, more or less. It does continue, and I can't really say how, or else I'm gonna spoil some key twists, but this is very much Colt Cruz's story here, and I'm 100% okay with how that turned out. Colt's father comes back into his life and drops Colt's half-sister off, who Colt's never met before, to look after while the father goes off on a music tour. As Colt continues to fall into a hole of depression and financial peril, his newfound sister challenges him to do something with his life, something he knows about very well. Again, I don't want to go too much further than that, but there are plenty of things that happen in Colt's story that are both interesting and keep the story moving at a really nice pace. Longshot only takes a few hours to run through, and it's by far the most creative thing in Madden 19. But it does falter in a fair amount of areas, especially when it comes to user influence. Still, I think it's worth a playthrough if you're big into the human element of sports and want to break from the monotonous Madden gameplay. It's Friday Night Lights, Hard Knocks, Last Chance U, all of that rolled into one. Just don't expect a dynamic experience out of it. You can also earn some pretty good Ultimate Team cards and branch off Devin Wade's story into franchise mode player career if you want to. Regardless of whether you enjoy this mode or not, it certainly seems like this might be the final year for Longshot, though we'll have to wait and see for sure. Madden's popular Ultimate Team mode is of course back, and to be straight, I've never gotten too deep into MUT. I usually start it, have fun for a few hours, and then put it down once I start asking myself what the point is every few minutes. This year, Ultimate Team has added solo battles. which works similarly to what you'd find in MLB The Show's Diamond Dynasty mode, where you can challenge a CPU-controlled user team, choose the difficulty, and earn points for winning. Prizes are handed out at different times in the week, depending on your score. EA decided to do away with contracts, taking down a fairly significant paywall that's been a staple of the mode. This year, MUT was really no different for me. I like opening packs because I used to collect sports cards as a kid, and it's fun to see what you can get. I like building my fantasy team and taking them out on the field, and MUT definitely has enough content to keep everyone busy, especially as the year goes on and they put out constant updates. The mode can be rewarding and it can be as competitive or zen-like as you want it to be, but for me, I like a more grounded experience like franchise. From what I can tell, MUT is really good this year, if MUT is indeed your thing. This has been a really long review and I could go on about even more, but I have to stop somewhere. There's plenty I haven't mentioned yet that has either been reported on by others in the community or will be found eventually. And after thinking about this carefully for a few days now, my verdict on Madden 19 is this: it's still Madden. Now, I know that might seem like a pretty simple and obvious conclusion, but it makes the most sense to me. How do I describe this game to people who hate Madden, who love Madden, who are usually somewhere in between? Look, this isn't an all-new, completely different game. It still plays like Madden has for the past few years for the most part. It still sounds like Madden, it still has a similar longevity. It's not reinventing itself, but with that out of the way, I do think Madden 19 is a good game. The way it plays feels rewarding, and there have been some really smart design choices made. I think if you've been on the fence about Madden for the past couple of years, I say give it a shot. If you've hated Madden for the past couple of years, this isn't going to do a whole lot to change your opinion on it. My biggest complaint from the past is still a severely weak area of this game: franchise mode. It's sufficient for a basic franchise experience, and it has improved, but when comparing it to almost every other game in the sports genre, it comes up pretty short. Not the worst, but nowhere near the best. The game has definitely benefited from the fresh air of the PC version, and a big part of my attachment to Madden 19 is the way it looks and plays on my PC, aside from the terrible stuttering I mentioned earlier. Madden 20 needs to make a giant step in franchise mode before I'll consider it significantly better than 19. Until then, I give Madden 19 4 stars out of 5.